Before we start this video, I want to say thank you so much for 100 subscribers. Our channel is growing slowly but surely, and we wouldn't be able to do this without all your help. So thank you so much for all the support. Now back to the video. Last year was quite interesting. We saw a large interest spike in PC gaming, and it was probably the best year to enter the PC gaming scene because the amount of players increased significantly. With this comes a surge of people that want to learn how to build their own computers. And because the PC Master Race is always welcome to add new members, we've decided to start a new video series called PCs for Newbies, where we explain PC building in general and how you can get into it. We'll also be talking about how each PC part works in the easiest way possible without getting too technical for all the newcomers. Welcome back to Fixie TV, I'm your host Anton, and today's video is the first episode of our series PCs for Newbies. In today's video, we'll be talking about the parts of a computer and how you can pick them out for your own personal gaming computer. We'll go in depth with each of these parts in future videos, so for now it's just the basics to get you started. Building your first gaming computer may seem intimidating at first, especially given that there's so many parts that if handled wrong, they could break. What helped us when speccing out our first gaming computers was to understand how these things work. Computers work similar to humans, like a human body. Think of the parts as individual organs that have certain functions that help the PC operate as a whole. So now we're gonna enumerate these parts so you guys can get a better idea of what parts are exactly inside a gaming computer. The most important part inside a gaming computer is the central processing unit, or CPU. Think of the CPU as the brains of the computer. It basically tells you what each of your components connected to your computer do. The CPU is important because it determines how your computer will perform general day-to-day tasks. So that could be browsing the web, scrolling through Facebook, and even watching this video right here on YouTube. Now we go to the motherboard. The motherboard is the thing that connects all of the components of your computer together. Kind of like the skeleton. A motherboard doesn't necessarily determine how fast your PC is gonna run, but what it does determine are the features that you get with your computer, like Wi-Fi, USB support, and even RGB. The next most important part is the graphics processing unit, or the GPU. They're also commonly known as the graphics card or the video card. The GPU is what generally determines your gameplay experience along with your CPU. The GPU's primary function is to generate pixels at a very high rate and render them onto your monitor. This is where the term frames per second or FPS came from. Generally speaking, the higher the FPS, the better the gameplay experience. The next component we're going to feature is RAM, or random access memory. This sort of acts as the temporary storage space of your CPU when processing data on your computer. This helps with keeping background tasks running and make sure that Google Chrome is nice and fed. Next on our list is storage. There are two main types of this: your hard disk drive, or HDD, and your solid state drives, or SSDs. SSDs are generally your go-to drives when you want to store data that you want to access quickly. Usually you put on your operating system on these drives. Generally speaking, they're more expensive per gigabyte, or they're more expensive in terms of capacity when compared to hard drives, but where they lack in storage space, they make up for in speed. SSDs usually come in different form factors like SATA or NVMe. SATA SSDs are generally compatible with all kinds of motherboards, but NVMe or M.2 on the other hand needs specific requirements on the motherboard. So you'll have to do your research when trying to pick out one or the other. Hard disk drives, or hard drives as we like to call them. Hard drives come in 3.5 and 2.5 inch variants and are generally cheaper than SSDs. The downside of a hard drive is that they're generally slower. They're great for storing bulk files like big movie projects or games, but generally you don't want to put your operating system on this kind of drive. Generally speaking, the most common builds that we see have a smaller SSD drive with Windows and other important apps, and a larger hard drive that contains most of your bulk files and games. Now we have the power supply unit, or the PSU. As the name suggests, the power supply provides power to the entire computer. Think of it as the heart of the computer. It does this by converting AC energy, or the electricity we get out of the wall, into DC energy, which is the kind of electricity that the components inside the computer use. So all the parts inside the computer are one way or another powered by the power supply, whether it be through the motherboard or directly plugged into it. The last part of the computer is its case. Although most people argue that a case isn't really part of a computer, it plays a big role in protecting all your PC components from outside elements. Generally speaking, you want to get the case with good airflow, something that allows cold air to pass through to cool your components properly. On the other hand, some people opt to get a case that looks really nice for the aesthetics. But ultimately, this is all up to you, and case preference is something that we can't determine. It's purely up to the PC builder. Now you understand what each of these components do, so you might be ready to spec out your new PC. So the first thing we would like to do when picking out the parts for a computer is to determine our budget. Obviously we can't spend more than we have, so we like to fit the most performance within a certain budget range. This determines what kind of parts you're able to get and which parts are completely out of the question. We're looking at you, RTX 3090. Now that you got your budget down, you can choose what platform or what CPU you want to go for. Are you going for the blue team Intel or team red AMD? Each have their own pros and cons. Generally speaking, when it comes to production work and 3D rendering, we recommend you go with AMD. On the other hand, if you want to just go for pure high FPS gaming, we recommend you go with Intel. The choice is purely based on what you do, but we're not saying one CPU can't do what the other can. These are just our recommendations. Now that you picked out your processor, getting a motherboard shouldn't be that hard. Picking up a motherboard is dependent on what kind of processor you choose first. What's important is you look for the processor socket type. The processor socket type needs to match your motherboard socket type. Most websites like PC Part Picker have compatibility checks, so you'll be able to cross-reference those and make sure that the components you do buy are compatible. I highly recommend you use these websites because it's a really friendly tool for first-time builders. Now, if you chose an AMD processor, you will have 3 motherboard selections to choose from, your A, B, and X variants. Your A series motherboard is typically a budget line and doesn't support overclocking. Your B and X motherboards support overclocking, but your X motherboard has more features. So it really boils down to you and what kind of features on the motherboard that you want. On the Intel side, on the other hand, you have 3 options to choose from as well. Your H, B, and Z variants. In Intel's case, only the Z variant is overclockable, and it usually has the most features. So again, check out the motherboard and see if it has the features that you want before picking it up. Picking your motherboard also determines how big your PC is gonna get. Again, there are mainly 3 sizes: full-size ATX, your tiny ITX builds, and your mid-sized M80X. Now that you picked out your CPU and motherboard, you can choose your RAM. This is the easy part because most RAM now is compatible with most motherboards out on the market. The main difference between each stick of RAM is their clock speed and their size. Generally speaking, we'd recommend you get about 16 gigs of RAM because it's a good middle ground for gaming and productivity, and we'd recommend that you get the speed 3200 MHz because it seems to be the middle ground for most processors out there. But you can opt to go higher or lower depending on the processor that you get if it supports it. It's also worth noting that Ryzen likes fast RAM. So you generally want to get faster RAM with a Ryzen chipset if it supports it. Again, check PC Part Picker and they'll be able to help you out there. Since you've got most of your main components down, you can kind of choose your GPU, which is what's really going to power your gaming experience. Your GPU decision is based off what resolution you want to play at and the kind of games that you want to play. So obviously this is all up to personal preference, but we suggest you look up reviews online before picking out a certain graphics card. We're going to be doing an in-depth video on the different GPU tiers, so stay tuned for that. With most of the important computer parts covered, we can move on to the more intricate parts, like the storage. Again, this is all based on your preference and what you need, so you can choose to get an SSD and an HDD combo depending. Most of the time, all of this is compatible, but make sure if you are getting an M.2 SSD, as we mentioned earlier, that your motherboard supports it. And last but not the least, we have the power supply. It's great to invest a lot of money into this because it's like the heart of your computer and it generally lasts a relatively long time. Now, please don't cheap out on this part because If you do, it can lead to breaking your entire system, and you wouldn't want that. Now, we don't have any particular recommendations because it all depends on what kind of computer you get. But what we do recommend is that you get a good 80 plus bronze unit, at least, depending on the parts, even if it's a budget system. Power supply manufacturers have wattage calculators like the one you see here. So you can input the kind of parts that you have and it will compute what ideal power supply you want from that certain manufacturer. Usually when you use these calculators, the wattage is overrated, so they're over-speccing for what you need. I suggest you do more research on the components that you have and see if anyone else has the similar build out there, so you can see the power supplies that they use. It might work for you. But it's also pretty safe to go with the recommendations of these power supply calculators because they'll work, no problem, for sure. We highly recommend the brands like Corsair and Seasonic because they tend to have better build quality and better warranty services. We've also linked down a PSU tier list that you can check and reference whenever you're buying your own power supply. So these power supplies have been tested by the communities on those forums, so do check them out if you're in the market for a new power supply for your new gaming PC. Now for the cooler of your CPU. Generally speaking, you don't need to go water cooling, but that's a whole different topic for a different video. But most CPUs, especially if you're a beginner and you don't get enthusiast level parts, come with their own cooler. Most of the time this is good enough for the workload that you're using it for, and if ever you want to upgrade down the line, you can. So yeah, box coolers work perfectly fine for beginners. Lastly, we have the case. This all boils down to your personal preference and the kind of airflow setup you want to try. So it's best to research the case as well to see what fits the build that you have. Also take note of the size of the motherboard that you have and the size of the graphics card you have. So the case that you get is appropriate for both of those things. So yeah, that's a general overview of all the PC parts that you need to build your own gaming computer. This whole thing wasn't as in-depth as we liked, but we hope that we were able to share some information that you guys learned as well. If we missed any information in the video, please comment down below. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, thumbs up and comment down below. If you like what you see, consider subscribing. We do weekly tech videos, and we hope to take you along for the ride. Anyways, till the next one, thanks for watching Fixie TV.